Hey everyone, it's November 14th, 2019 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Higher Ed Admissions Live. I'm your host, Joe Salustio. I'm out of breath because I was late to start this broadcast. So I'm going to take all right. I am your host, Joe Salustio. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Claremont Lincoln University, and today we are discussing today's higher ed trends in marketing and enrollment for traditional and non-traditional schools. This Admissions Live edition is part of the Higher Ed Live Network. All of these episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. And you also can be a part of these live broadcasts by sharing your knowledge. Participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using hashtag HigherEdLive. Today's live broadcast is powered by Platform Q, education's conduit online engagement platform. Learn how to integrate continuous online engagement into your marketing and enrollment plans using Conduit. Visit platformqedu.com. All of our episodes are recorded. They're free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to this podcast. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. New digital admissions research offers rich insights into the nuances of prospective teen students' behavior during the college search and selection process. M. Stoner and Target X have designed a survey focusing on how prospective teen students use a range of digital tools like social media, websites, email, and digital ads as they make this vital decision in their lives, and what information is most helpful at each stage of the journey. Shortly, I'll be putting out a tweet on the Higher Ed Live Twitter account, giving you access to download that study. You can sign up now to receive early access to the digital admissions white paper and a first look at the data. Okay, all that's out of the way. Boy, I'm excited to get the three of you guys on this live broadcast. You all look very nice today, and I'm excited to talk to you. But I thought, it'd be great for you to introduce yourselves, because I certainly can't do justice to introducing you like you can for yourselves. And Maxine, I'll start with you. And why don't you tell everybody who you are, where you're from, and what you do?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Joe, first of all, for having me on the podcast. It's such an honor. My name is Maxine Saya. I am known mostly for being the founder of Socrates Post, which is an ad-free college admissions newsletter that focuses on humanizing college admissions. I interview college admissions professionals, learn about their personal stories, their career, and share that information with college applicants and their families. I am from California. I went to college at Northwestern. After graduating, I worked in the college consulting field. I was a test prep instructor, a curriculum editor, and also an admissions interviewer.
Awesome. Very nice to have you here. Thank you. All right, Alvin.
All right. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate being here. I'm very excited today. My name is Alvin Freitas. I am the Director of Recruitment and Field Relations at Toro Grad Schools of Education. I'm actually from Boston, Massachusetts. I went to Northeastern University, and I went to Teachers College, Columbia University as well, got my master's there. I worked all over, University of California, Berkeley, Boston University, I worked at Michigan State. I lived in China for a year. I've done a lot of admissions work. I've done student services. I've been in the field for over 15 years in higher education. So I'm happy to be here, Joe.
All right. And in your personal life, I hear that you are also a fantastic podcast host. You want to tell people a little bit about that?
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. I appreciate that. So I also have my own podcast, which is called From Idea to Reality, the Magenta podcast with Alvin Freitas. And Joe was actually my first guest on the show, and basically the show is talking about folks who have an idea and the process of how they're going through making it a reality. And Joe was talking about his idea of wanting to be a university president. So if you want to learn more, definitely check it out. You can search my name, Alvin Freitas, and you'll find the Magenta podcast.
And I got with Alvin just starting out to be his first guest, because he can only go up with his guests from there. Nobody wants to listen to me. Amri.
Sure. My name's Amidala I'm the managing editor of The Evolution, since this is an audio broadcast with 3 L's. We're an online newspaper focused on non-traditional higher education. So basically what we do is publish articles and interviews by leaders across the post-secondary space, ranging from, deans and directors to presidents and provosts to CIOs to employers and students and everyone in between, talking about how higher education is evolving, especially in regards to the growing numbers of non-traditional learners and the needs that demographic has, and broadly talking about sort of how higher education itself is changing and how institutions are adapting to keep pace. So pretty simple stuff, really.
Yeah, well, it makes you pretty knowledgeable reading all those articles that people are submitting. I'm sure you're getting it from all angles.
It's a good position to be in. We launched in 2012, and when we launched, our focus was exclusively on sort of continuing education, non-credit programs, because we realized that people were having some fascinating conversations about how the industry was evolving, but realized that a lot of those people were kind of in the same band. Deans would talk to deans and presidents would talk to presidents, but it was rare, even within a given institution, for a dean to talk to a president about what they saw as the future of their institution. So we tried to create a community where all those groups could come together and kind of share these opinions and insights without the awkwardness of trying to do that in person.
Great. Well, guys, before we get going, and Maxine, I'm going to bring you kind of the first question. I would be remiss if I did not mention that I just came from Las Vegas on Tuesday. It's today, Thursday or when? I don't know what day. But anyway, I came from Las Vegas on Tuesday and from the American Marketing Association Higher Education Conference, where Claremont Lincoln University was selected by our peers as the 2019 Higher Ed Marketing Team of the Year. So
amazing! Congratulations!
Thank you. We're very excited about that. My teammates got an opportunity to get on stage in our competition there. The other nominees were SUNY Stony Brook, State University of New York at Stony Brook, and the University of Notre Dame. So a little David and Goliath action there. But I did get to hear a lot about what's happening in enrollment and marketing. And Maxine, I'm going to go to you. One of the biggest and most talked about topics was this drop-off in enrollment that schools are worried about over the next 5 to 6 years. They're calling it the big 2026 enrollment drop-off, where maybe 15% of college-age students, that's going to be declining by about 15%. So schools are panicking a little bit, okay, about what to do. And, you're working to explore admissions offices in the traditional space mostly. Are you finding this panic at all, or even a recognition that there's going to be enrollment struggles in the future?
I am. That's a great question. Even though I work typically with more traditional four-year universities, I publish news briefs every week about what's happening in the industry. So just a few of the things that I've been covering that really match what you've learned at AMA. For example, 2 state schools in Arkansas merged. They were concerned about dropping enrollment, and they've seen dropping enrollments over the last few years. They became one school. A school in Kentucky, Cumberland, they cut their tuition by 57%, and they offered all of their on-campus students free textbook loans as a way to combat declining enrollment. They got a 47% enrollment increase. So there are some schools that are acting more proactively to combat that. There's also been a ton of scholarships that I've been seeing directed for low-income students. For example, Pitt, they will be matching Pell Grants for low-income students. That's another way to combat the enrollment decline. There are universities like Clarkson. I've seen them offering incentives for applying early decision. For example, they're going to offer $8,000 over the course of 4 years for anyone who applies and gets accepted early decision, which also protects their yield. Many more things. GWU is already getting ahead of the game, and they're considering slashing enrollment by 20% in the next 5 years. I can go on with so many examples, but to answer your question, absolutely yes, that is something that we've been seeing, despite the fact that yeah, there are universities that don't really have to worry about enrollment so much. They're more concerned about protecting their yield. They'll always get more and more applications as their reputation improves and as their admissions rates drop. But absolutely, I've been seeing that as well.
Amrit, Alvin, what do you have to say about that, or chime in on that?
Sure. Well, I mean, fundamentally, it speaks to a shifting reality of what higher education is. I think that the more institutions recognize that there is a population decline that's coming, call it, or at least a declining number of what we'd call traditional age students, more and more colleges and universities are going to have to find ways to serve the vast majority of adults who are 25 plus and looking down the barrel of a 100-year life, which doesn't end at retirement at 65. We're in a reality where folks are going to need access to continuous learning, ongoing training, and continuous development over the course of their lifetimes. And colleges and universities are finally in a position where, where in the past it would have been nice for them to have offerings geared towards adults to support that process, it's becoming a fundamental need, a necessity. This is what Clayton Christensen was talking about, where he predicted, I think some 5 years ago, that 50% of colleges and universities would either close or merge by, I believe the prediction was 2030 or 2027. And that really spoke to that idea that, the nail that doesn't break or bend gets hammered, right? Like you have to adapt to modern realities. So
but
for that,
is higher ed adverse to elasticity and adaptability in some ways? I mean, there's a lot of bureaucracy in higher ed.
There's a lot of bureaucracy in higher ed, but at the end of the day, if it's closure or continuing education, presumably the capacity to adapt programming to serve a different audience would be a preferable outcome. All the knowledge in the world is at people's fingertips today. So it's, there's a reality that colleges and universities need to consider, well, what is it that we offer beyond being a gatekeeper of knowledge in order to serve, our key stakeholders, be it students, be it employers, be it communities, and providing people the capacity to continue their education and training with more short-term engagements, more opportunities for micro-credential or competency building, more opportunities to progress in a changing labor market. These are the things that I believe, and that certainly a number of the authors on evolution seem to believe, will characterize the higher education industry of the future.
It's interesting that you say that. And Alvin, go ahead, Alvin. Jump in.
I'm going to chime in real quick. I also think that it's going back to the basics as well. We all know the power of branding. Like Maxine talked about, all these big schools that have the brand names, they're worried about lowering their admissions rates. And so I think schools who have yet to jump on, it's the wake-up call now, big time. You got to get on the branding. You got to get on creating partnerships. Once you start your branding and you're creating your partnerships, this is all stuff that we all know. It's very simple. So now I like the fact that these numbers are coming out, the stats are coming out, people are starting to wake up. It's going to be easier for folks like myself to talk to higher administration, to come up with some creative ideas and say, hey, listen, here's the numbers, they're backing up. Now is the time where we have to put our funding, our resources into really branding ourselves, separate ourselves, telling our story, and letting people know why they should come here, and then creating partnerships with companies, with other schools, whether if it's, coming together with another school, and like Maxine was talking about. But I think that the branding piece is something that really is a wake-up call for a lot of folks in higher ed right now.
That's interesting, Alvin, that you say that, because when I was at AMA a couple of days ago, there was one of the keynote speakers, and I cannot remember her name. She asked the crowd to do an exercise. And, this is primarily at the American Marketing Association. It was, let's call it middle management, marketers, directors of marketing, some higher level marketing folks, but they're, sort of in that middle executive area. And the exercise was to practice talking to your administrator about why marketing is important for strategic growth. And my mind was blown. Like I'm going, like, this is a conversation that has to exist. You have to go to someone and try to convince them that branding and marketing is key to survival of your university. And then it got me thinking that there are schools that may have never had to recruit before that now have to actually actively recruit. Is that fair to say, you think?
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, it's a wake-up call now. It really is. And I agree with there's so many folks. Well, okay, we all know higher ed, it's bureaucracy, it's old institutions, people who've been in higher ed for a long, long time, and there's a certain mindset. And so now with times changing and the stats coming out, we have to change that mindset. And there's certain folks in certain positions that they need to be convinced. We get tons of folks from friends, and so we don't have to invest money into marketing, digital marketing. You know, what is the influencer marketing? What's the whole point of that? Does it make sense? We're wasting dollars. We've always received a ton of applications. We don't have to worry about it. But now, like I said, it's the wake-up call. So I'd love to hear what the other folks have to say about that.
Well, it's a good point. I mean, the longer that we rely on traditional ranking metrics, like the ratings put out by US World and News, for example, where reputation is a factor that is considered when determining an institutional quality. I mean, the longer that we use factors like that, like exclusivity, to determine an institution's quality, the longer that, or the more institutions are going to find themselves in trouble. Like it's what, there was a great quote I was presenting with a fellow named Jim Broomall, who used to be at the University of Delaware. He said, universities and country clubs are the only organizations that judge their success by the number of people they keep out. And that's, it's stuck in the back of my head because I think it's a fascinating way to think about how these ranking systems and how institutional ratings have forced us to think about the role of an institution, of a post-secondary institution, as an organization designed to weed out the weak as opposed to lift up a community. And it's a fundamentally different purpose, but it starts speaking to, well, how flexible can you be? Either you are the be all and end all and therefore highly ranked, or you serve your community, in which case you're flexible. So, you know, I think as we start getting away from that mentality of the primacy of a college or university, the closer we're going to get to a place where colleges and universities can actually serve the stakeholders and communities that need their help.
Maxine, you're reporting on admissions inside of the heart, so to speak, of admissions departments. I mean, are rankings still important to kids coming into school at 18, to parents? Is there a shift away from a ranking being important? And how is online education even affecting the thought process for parents that are looking at huge debt and maybe thinking there's an easier, equal quality way to do it? I mean, what are you seeing in terms of rankings, online, on ground kind of stuff?
I get the privilege of knowing what people are interested in because I get to track what people are clicking in my newsletters, and rankings are really interesting to them. No matter what, if I'm talking about future trends or the new technologies that are being used in admissions offices around the country, around the world, no matter what, if there's something about a ranking, people want to know. So my audience isn't only in the United States. We have a lot of people who read from Asia, for example, South America, some from Africa, and that is their number one piece of information that they gather when they learn about American universities. They might just type in Google or whatever search engine they use, top American universities. And what you guys are saying is true. If that's the first thing they see, they will go off of the top 10 schools. The questions that I get from my readers, I have a weekly advice column, are oftentimes, how do I get into a top 5 computer science program? So I have seen that it still matters to the readers that I serve.
That's interesting. Well, let's talk about marketing. And this is an interesting, there's a school here in California. I was just sifting through LinkedIn today, and I saw that they are one of the most recent schools to drop SAT and ACT scores as a requirement for admission to their university. And I thought, you know, how does a person outside higher ed look at something like that? To me, inside higher ed, I'm going, what a great marketing tool. What a great marketing tool to increase your enrollment. Is it, you know, to maybe people who are worried about educational quality? It could be an indicator that educational quality may decrease if you're opening your doors wider. How do you guys rationalize the trend, really, you know, for schools to be dropping their scoring, ACTs and SATs for entrance? Maxine?
One interview that I recently had was with an admissions officer at Whitman, and he answered this in a really interesting way. It's not that we no longer care about how well you do in school, but every other part of your application then becomes more important. We put more weight on your letters of recommendation. We put more weight on your essay. We put more weight on maybe your interview. So the way I rationalize it for you, I think it's great. Of course, it's a great marketing tool. And when I write about that, my readers really want to know which schools are dropping their SAT requirements. They get really excited about that. But it adds another level of stress for some parents and their kids, because they're thinking, okay, well, my kid could have been a pretty good test taker compared to his peers, but now he has to write a stellar essay, and now we have to hire a coach, or now we have to make sure that he is an All-American in basketball this year, not next year. So there are other aspects where the stress that would have gone onto the test prep and the taking the exam itself multiple times becomes then spread among everything else these students have to do to get into their dream colleges.
Guys?
Go ahead, man.
Well, I mean, it's tough to speak on from the perspective of someone who mostly works in sort of adult and non-traditional higher education. You know, that the SAT score funded for a 30-year-old trying to, you know, enter a degree program that's going to get him or her into a, you know, a stable career, the SAT score is completely irrelevant.
But the GMAT and GREs are relevant.
The GMAT and GRE becomes
and the
relevant.
trend has been ongoing at the graduate level.
But my suggestion is that for most folks who are looking for an ongoing education opportunity, it's more about how is the institution positioned to help them succeed, not what are they coming in with and what's sort of the leg up that they already have in terms of their capacity to succeed in an education program. You know, if we're talking about colleges and universities as conduits for growth, as organizations designed to help lift up communities, the more metrics that you put into place designed to keep people out, the less capacity you actually have to start diversifying that opportunity and access. So, you know, I think the challenging part about this conversation too is that this is not a one-size-fits-all conversation. I mean, what makes sense for an elite university won't necessarily make sense for a community college, or won't necessarily make sense for, you know, a smaller institution designed to support adults. Like, I'd say for your average adult-serving institution, they're more focused on, let's make sure someone's actually interested in pursuing a particular outcome, and then help them get there with an array of services and support mechanisms, as opposed to, well, how well did they score and how likely are they to finish? Because frankly, when we're talking about test scores, what we're looking at is their likelihood to succeed through a program.
Right.
So my suggestion is that a post-secondary institution, if it's truly serving the community that it endeavors to serve, has a responsibility to actually help people succeed, as opposed to look at a test score and say, that's, you know, likely to succeed, not likely to succeed. We're going to keep you out. We're going to let you in.
Yeah, I would also add that it seems as though it's early days with all of this. So I'm not sure there's enough data to prove, does it lower quality? Does it actually help with retention rates? Does it provide more equity, you know, and more inclusion? It's early days. Let's see it's a great marketing tool. Absolutely. No doubt about it. But it's still in terms of the data, and does it work? You know, are we still getting high completion rates? Are people graduate? Are they getting good jobs? You know, let's go through the whole process first and let's see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
That
Maxine,
not only are, sorry?
It looked like you were about ready to jump in. That's why I was just asking you to jump in.
Well, not only are schools eliminating the SAT or ACT, some of you guys were talking about serving the adult population. Their law schools, Yale, Columbia, Harvard, NYU, for example, are now accepting the GRE in lieu of the LSAT, which historically has been the only test you can take to even get into law school. Mm-hmm. And I think, going back to what we're talking about, helping with enrollment and retention, the LSAT is held way fewer times than the GRE. It has historically been more expensive and also more difficult to prepare for. So I think even law schools of the elite nature that I just talked about are looking for some help in that way.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, and just going back to the AMA conference, there's just a lot of interesting trends coming out of that. One, it seemed like one of the trends that was spoken about was a difficulty at finding students at the graduate level, and you know, schools traditional schools, non-traditional schools looking to grow their graduate population because they're planning for the undergraduate population to decline over the next number of years. And so there's a big opportunity in non-traditional adult learners, right, who, and it's interesting, I personalized this so much. When I was going to graduate school and looking at a GPA, I thought it was absolutely ridiculous to hold me to a GPA at my undergrad 10 years ago when I was, skipping my microeconomics course and only going 4 times, throughout the entire semester, trying to pass just the test, right? And then, my graduate GPA was a whole lot better because I had, it was more serious. But, there's trouble in growing this graduate population. Why? Well, because is it a value proposition that schools are failing to do? Alvin, you talked about market differentiation. Is there too much noise? Because schools are operating more like call it a regular business who puts a whole lot of dollars into marketing and hits you with a whole lot of messaging, times that by 20, by 30, by 50 schools in your area of noise, and it becomes difficult to make choices. I mean, how do you guys rationalize, schools looking to grow graduate population and having trouble doing it?
Well, I'll jump in here because I work with that population for the grad schools. So it is a very difficult market, obviously. We're in New York, but we're kind of spread out. We have campuses everywhere. And so one of the things that we're working on is pathway programs, which I'm sure a lot of folks are doing as well, right? You're working with your undergrad student body, and you're trying to figure out how can we get them in and then start thinking about grad school. So we're going as early as high school. So we have our undergraduate advisors go to high schools, and they're already talking about, we have pathway programs for grad schools. So it's changing the mindset. It's like, you're not just going to undergrad, you're going to grad school with us as well. So again, it's a part of that whole branding I keep coming back to, and creating partnerships with folks, which is very important. One of the things that we've done well here is create partnerships with the Department of Education in New York City. And we've had events to show, and it's interesting, what we've done is that we've actually invited community members, prospective students, current students, alumni, staff, faculty, everyone to take part in these events, online or in person. And what we're trying to do is create branding. We're trying to be a content leader. We're trying to create value. And so I think, that's really where grad schools need to focus on now, is how do we create value for the community? How do we provide all this amazing access, all this amazing content that we have that we only usually give to our current students? Let's show the world what we have available. Let's let them see, and then let them decide if they want to come to us. One of the things I keep thinking about is voice search. That's going to be a big thing. People are going to start asking, say, Siri, I want the top 10 colleges in my area for education. We want to be the first one on that, of course, and that comes with branding. And branding is all about, partnerships. It's all about creating content of value. And so I think, we start early with the high schools, changing the mindset, going there and saying, hey, you're coming to us for undergrad, and then you're coming to us for grad. That pipeline helps us increase graduate students. That's something that's been successful with us. So I think that's something that a lot of other grad schools are also working on.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'll add something. Obviously, I work a lot with the undergrad population and the pre-undergrad population. One of the questions they ask all the time is, how do I get more scholarships? How do I get money? And they're looking way ahead. They haven't even applied yet, but they know they don't have enough to pay for all 4 years without getting just completely saddled by student debt. I get this feeling that grad schools are not proposing a way that these individuals with bachelors, with a lot of student debt, can actually afford graduate school. You can talk about value. Of course, there's the interest in the subject. There's, the promise of maybe a promotion in the future, but they're worried about their current day. How do I pay rent today if I have $350 to pay every single month for the next at least 10 years? I'm absolutely positive this is something that is on their minds, especially with the populations that I serve every day.
I would suggest that we're fundamentally not creative enough with credentials. I think we have a lot of work to make up there. we're trying to design a higher ed system built around the norms of the last 50 or 60 years for a labor market where, we're expecting 50% of work tasks to be automatable by 2030. We're expecting 15 to 30% of the workforce in the United States to have to shift industry or job because their jobs are going to be automated. So, I think when we look at, what can we do as a university to serve a population that's aging and a declining number of traditional age learners? Well, let's do graduate education. Seems to be the wrong answer. What I would suggest is, what if we were to look at how we could unbundle our existing offerings to create more bite-sized learning opportunities for adults who have less time and less resources at their disposal to invest in their ongoing learning? Right? Like, how do we create a post-secondary ecosystem that's designed around the needs of an adult who has 7 or 8 competing priorities for their time and money? And then once we start recognizing that, as learners are looking at higher education more as a fungible product, as something that's interchangeable between institution to institution to institution, or, as an extreme threat to higher education, or looking to boot camps, or looking to MOOCs, or looking to YouTube videos as a way to advance their own competencies and skills, how do we as post-secondary institutions take the knowledge and expertise that lives within these gated programs and start making it more accessible? To my mind, the more accessible we make sort of knowledge and service to the institution, the more capacity we actually have to serve these individuals who are looking for ongoing learning opportunities. But, to say, we need to create a new gated product that is only accessible to a very small population of individuals doesn't seem to me to be the best way to address a declining enrollment of folks looking for traditional programs.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Go ahead, Alvin, jump in.
No, I just want to jump in. I think super valid point. And I think that's why it's really important for us to have advisory boards where we have the companies come in and talk to us. They know what they're looking for. They know the labor market. What are the skill sets that they want? What should we be teaching them? How can we make our students more marketable for their job opportunities? So again, it goes back to that partnership. So if you have partnerships with companies in your surrounding neighborhood where your alumni are going to apply to, then you can start to change the curriculum, and you can kind of feel, like you were saying, you could create different programs, micro credentialing. If that works for the employer and it's going to give them employment, I mean, that's the ultimate goal. We want them to be learners and continue. We talked about this earlier, lifelong learners, but we also want them to have a good job, and get paid. And so one of the ways to do that is to have advisory boards, bring in the companies. Let's have a conversation. Let's figure out what are the needs of the market, and then let's supply the demand. Let's supply it. Let's figure it out.
I think what a lot of undergrads, though, are hearing from recruiters at big companies is that their education is one piece of it, but what is their real work experience? And I think grad schools are competing with opportunities like getting internships, apprenticeships, fellowships, because of what these individuals that you just talked about on advisory boards are saying. Hey, good for you. You went to Harvard, got 4.0, amazing. But have you spent any time working in a company? Do you know how to navigate corporate politics? Do you know how to come up with a pitch? Can you talk to the person sitting in the cubicle next to you? And when those opportunities become less maybe attractive to them, I think is when grad schools might have their place. But because grad school comes with that high price tag that you can do an internship and get paid even for minimum wage, is still sometimes very attractive to those people that grad schools want to apply.
Well, and you guys, we're talking debt, and then we're talking alternatives, right? And I did a podcast a while back where I talked about the value of higher education, because it is in question in a lot of ways, right? There's more and more people that just question whether they want to take on the debt and whether there's going to be a return on their investment. I think that's due, in part of my dissertation that I'm literally a month away from finishing, hopefully, is the sort of emergence of the student consumer who's more financially savvy than they've ever been because of the information that's at their fingertips. For adult students who have, there's more and more adult students, they've understood what it's like to pay bills before they enter into grad school. And so they're very careful about what that looks like. But this value of higher education. So what comes out of value or questioning value is what I think some people are calling the great tuition discount race. Right? Where, I don't know where it came out of a financial aid conference, or I read it somewhere, that the average discounting rate amongst public universities, private universities. It was like 51 or 52% on a tuition amount. And that was across undergraduate, graduate schools. And that's something that I understand it, because I think it's, I wonder well, maybe I don't understand it. And I'm hoping you guys can explain it to me, because there is this race for the student, and is the student consumer dictating, let me think about how I want to ask you guys this. When we're talking about marketing and enrollment trends, is the student so much more financially aware, even at the undergraduate level, that they literally will call 10 schools they get accepted to and say, what scholarship will you offer me? What scholarship will you offer me? What scholarship will you offer me? And literally play them one off against each other until they get the biggest discount rate? Or is it a competitive thing where schools are trying to be more competitive?
I'd go further than that. I'd say your modern customer, right, is it's someone who's been shopping on Amazon, has been watching content on Netflix. Like, even if we're talking about an 18-year-old coming straight out of high school, they have an expectation for seamlessness and ease. So when we look at what are the factors that they're going to consider, for the most part, when they're looking at sort of a post-secondary experience, a college or university needs to treat them as such. They need to treat them with respect at the outset. They need to provide as much information as possible for that individual to make a choice. And I would say, like, the tuition discounting piece starts to raise fundamental questions about why you're charging that much in the first place. If you can discount your tuition by 51%, then what should the tuition rate be? And why is it 51% more expensive than what you're actually charging? So I think you mentioned something that I actually really want to tackle, which is this idea of the declining value of higher education. And I would suggest that the number of non-traditional learners, so in 2002, it was 74% of students taking out financial aid were non-traditional. And that's just folks taking out financial aid. That's not even counting the non-credit population. So if we're looking at those kinds of numbers, we can see there's sort of a lifelong value to engaging in a post-secondary education. I think the value reduction comes from the fact that we've defined higher education as the pursuit of a degree. And because we've defined it so tightly as this pursuit of one kind of credential, without sort of what comes after it, which is, well, where are you getting your technical skills? Where are you building your soft skills? How are you developing into an individual that's actually hireable? Because we've defined higher education and degrees as being one and the same, we've stopped ourselves from being able to really communicate what kind of value a college or university can provide an individual coming through the door. And by the same token, we've defined their success as achieving a degree, when that individual might be coming to the institution for one piece of knowledge or one competency that's going to allow them to progress in their careers. So because we've defined what higher education is so tightly and so compactly, we haven't given space for the flexibility that's necessary in a modern consumer world. We haven't given people crunchy peanut butter and smooth peanut butter. We've just said, this is peanut butter. So I think, like, when you start getting that, when you define your product to the extent that a consumer can't find what they're looking for, either they're going to start researching and saying, well, where can I get what I want? Or they're going to say, maybe this isn't for me, and a boot camp might be the answer. Or maybe this isn't for me.
We need to provide the jelly too, with the peanut butter.
So I think that we as a higher education industry need to recognize the importance of diversification and actually adapt to serving it.
That's a really good point. And the question of value, I think, has a couple of spider webs. It can go off in a number of ways. Now, when you're looking at tuition discounting in general, Maxine, I'll ask you this because you're in the thick of it with the undergrad population. Mm-hmm. Is tuition discounting? Do schools, like a school could just say, our program's $74,000, $100,000, but we're discounting it by half, so we're just going to price it at $50,000 from now on, right? We're just going to reprice it. But does that dilute value, right? So it's easier to keep it really high because it seems more valuable at $100,000 or $200,000 over a 4-year period, and discounting it than it would be to just price it where it's at. And then Alvin, that's sort of the first part of the question. The second part of the question that Amrit was tackling is just this overall value of higher ed. And are you seeing that at the graduate level? And we'll kind of go around the table.
Yeah, go ahead, Maxine.
So when you were talking about that, it reminded me of one of the recent topics I discussed with my readers, which was there's a prediction that U Chicago will be would cost $100,000 a year within the next 6 years. What they think is really exciting about that is that as their applications continue to grow and their admissions rate continues to decline, the prestige of the school will increase with the higher price. From my understanding, the higher price is a way to subsidize those who do not pay full price, because there are some individuals who do pay full price. And from one student to the next student, you're typically seeing very different financial aid packages. And my tuition from the person sitting next to me in Bio 101 is probably completely different. And I think that's the struggle that schools have, because you're trying to create value to the individual. So you're trying to figure out, what is the likelihood of this person picking UChicago over a school, for example, like Northwestern, if I give them this amount of money, but if I give them just a little more, is that going to mean that they're going to commit versus just taking this offer, but then I could have given the spot to someone else? There's so much of a balance of how much is it, when do we give it to them, how do we split it up in the year so it seems attractive to this individual. So the firms that work on basically packaging financial aid for universities have to do this all the time. It seems like, to me, it's a huge challenge.
You know, I think, and Alvin, let me just say one thing before you go. A value of an endowment, if you're a university that has an endowment, and there's some out there with, like, I don't know, a multi-billion-dollar endowments, you can discount, discount left and right, and it's not going to affect you in any way. You know, there's some of us out there, like myself in Claremont Lincoln University, where endowment is a word that we don't even understand what that is, because we operate student by student by student by student. And so when somebody even brings up or breathes discount, I shut up. But we also price our programs at the graduate degree level at $18,000 for a very, very high quality graduate education. Okay, so we price it the way it's supposed to be priced. But in the same token, discount is a word you hear just in general with schools. And Alvin, do you believe that the student will call around and dictate the scholarship reduction process because they understand more about how higher ed works when they become at the graduate level?
Absolutely. The students are in complete control. We have now what's called a cell phone. And with that cell phone, they have the power that all the information is at their fingertips. There's nothing they can't find out, and they're very savvy. Even on the undergraduate level, the parents, the grad level themselves, extremely savvy, and they are comparing. They say, okay, can I get here? Can I get there? And how much am I going to offer here? Am I going to get an assistantship over here? Am I going to get, and what's my opportunity of growing and getting a great job? What type of partnerships do they have? I want to work at Google. It's just going to be my best way, my best pathway to get to Google. So that cell phone, it has so much power, and they're very savvy. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of institutions of higher ed don't understand that they basically, students have the power now. They really do. They can research, is a micro-credential more important to where I want to? And they can figure out how to create that path, So the more we understand it, the more we start testing our marketing efforts. We have to constantly test. Does this work? And then, predictive analytics. Where are they coming from? What are they doing? What are the patterns that they're doing online, so that we know that they want to continue their studies at our institution? Things like that, I think higher education folks have to start thinking about.
Can I just add one thing? I recently learned about a university that's doing this tuition discounting, this experiment in a really creative way. They dropped their tuition from the $50,000s to the $30,000s, and to make up, they asked for donations from the community or their alums, and they saw their applications and enrollment increase. It was St. John's College. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because when the applicants are looking at this university, they're thinking, their previous customers, their current alumni, are so happy that they are willing to give so much money to basically cover what would have been my portion of tuition. So I don't know if that's a direct correlation or it just happened to be at the same time this all happened, but it was an interesting case study.
Great. Well, we can go about another 14 minutes or so, guys. And so I'll ask, as we move towards closing, if there's any marketing or enrollment higher ed trend that's on your mind that we haven't talked about that you think is going to be something that's discussed over the next weeks, months, years. And if you want to bring that up and just for our audience, because we're talking about trends, what's that trend we need to keep an eye on? Amrit, I'll go to you first.
Sure. I mean, fundamentally, I think when we're talking about enrollment trends, we're thinking about who our modern learner is and what they're looking for. I think it requires us to rethink our student life cycle. We tend to think of the student life cycle as being this very fixed period between, recruitment, enrollment, persistence, completion, give us money.
Right.
That's the life cycle. But if you think about, how, I used the example of Amazon earlier. Think about Amazon's life cycle, right? It's not, I've bought a product, I have the product, Amazon asks me for a donation. So why does higher education consider that to be a reasonable way to conduct business, especially given how reliant many institutions are becoming on donations in order to just operate? So if we rethink the customer life cycle to one that's more lifelong, one that fits this idea of, serving the communities, creating opportunities for kids to come in for summer camps or dual enrollment opportunities, creating opportunities for them to do their four-year degree. And I think one thing I want to be very clear about is I don't think the four-year degree or traditional graduate education is going anywhere. I just think that can't be the exclusive product that colleges, universities provide. But then once an individual graduates, to think about how to consciously engage them with ongoing career services, with academic advising that progresses with them through their life cycle, so that as they age and as their career advances, they have constant engagement from the institution as to how they can progress and grow. Suddenly, I think we're talking about a college or university that can deliver true lifelong value to an individual that goes beyond hoping they had a really good time at a football game 30 years ago. And that's kind of what I think that as we look at, well, what are the marketing trends? What are the enrollment trends? And I think there's a lot of micro trends we can look at for how to market in the short term, how we can make sure we stand out against the choice paralysis that your average consumer faces today. But if we're looking at what is it going to take for a college or university to be successful over the next 50 to 100 years, I think it's a matter of understanding that individuals don't live three-stage lives anymore. Individuals live long, like 100-year lives are non-linear, they're complex, they're multi-stage, they require really personalized engagements throughout. And if the institution can position itself at the center of an individual's lifelong learning journey, all of a sudden you have a very different approach to how an institution can provide that constant ongoing value. But it requires a very different mentality for what role the institution plays in an individual's life. And it also requires a very different positioning for the prioritization of those services that go outside of just the sheer gatekeeping of knowledge. Like the professor has an idea, it comes out of their mouth, it goes into the student's ears, now you've learned something. That can't be the lifelong model for a college or university. UC Irvine, for example, put career services into its continuing education division, its extension, specifically because it recognizes that needs to be a part of the college's ongoing lifelong learning mission. So I realize it's not quite a marketing enrollment trend. It's more a what is an institution trend. But when we talk about marketing and enrollment, we're really talking about how we communicate the value of an organization. And if we're talking about how we communicate the value of an organization, maybe it's worth asking what the value of that organization is.
Nice. All right, Alvin.
I would say, and I mentioned this earlier, I think, this is nothing new. It's not like groundbreaking stuff here, but marketing trend for me is basically branding, and then creating partnerships, but also providing value, content of value, and opening up, again, I mentioned this earlier, of the vast amount of resources that are available within institutions of higher education that have traditionally been only held towards those who are inside the gates. So I think, we're going to see more of events where folks can attend online, can attend in person, and anyone can drop in. And anyone can hear a professor talk about a certain subject area, or when an institution brings in someone from a U.S. Department of Education, for example, or from a different company, and they have a talk, and maybe it's just a faculty development component. But why not open that up to everyone and say, what does it look like inside? What would it look like for me to be a student inside there? So part of the marketing trend that I see that I think will happen is a lot more of that. And then that way you have the registration component. And I'm going to get a little practical here, but you get the registration component, people are signing up, you're increasing your list building. And that way you have them there. And that when you have another program or event, then you email them out, hey, thank you for attending. We have another program. Come on out, check this out. And that eventually you start to nurture them. There's the whole, sequence of email nurturing and all that good stuff. But then you're diving deep into the data as well. You got AI, machine learning, predictive analytics. You got a whole bunch of cool tools now for marketing that you can kind of test and find out what are the students wanting, where are they coming from, what are the patterns that they do online before they come on campus, and what are the events that they like, and you can segment. There's so much opportunity now to really do deep dive into the analytics of your customers, your clients, your prospective students. So I think that's what we're going to see more of, is those really focus on branding and providing content about opening up the gates and having everyone come in and get a chance to see what's inside and see what is the value. Like you talked about, what value are you providing me? Well, let's show them what we're providing. So I think that's what we're going to see.
Nice. And Maxine.
So I'll talk a little bit more about the enrollment aspect, what I've heard about closing the deal. This one really surprised me. It was when a university used paper applications. I was shocked. We talk about email funnels, we talk about the marketing campaigns, the Facebook ads, and this university literally has their applications on the table at the booth. And, they literally tell the student, if you're interested, just fill out an application right now. It's really easy, or you can just take one home and write a draft. And then if you want to submit it online, go for it. But they right there and then get that contact information and get the connection going. And that one really, really interested me. One thing that the admissions officers continue telling me that really works with them is meeting their students in person, getting Starbucks with them. Freddie, who works at Lynn University's admissions director there, he said, one day we were supposed to meet at McDonald's. For some reason it was closed. We found a different restaurant. We had the interview for 2 hours. They were sold. That personal connection. And it's sort of moving away from the funnels and the emails, which students get so many of all the time. One of the admissions officers I talked to said, well, she worked at Florida Southern, and she said, I later on found out that a candidate who ended up attending my university used an auto fill-in method to fill in the name of the school for 32 essays that then she mass distributed to all of these universities. So getting more personal, focusing also on talking to the parents, learning about the parents of these applicants, because at that age, at least at the undergraduate level, they are very involved in the process. They are involved with helping them find help and also paying for it as well. Understanding how a parent in New York might feel differently from a parent in Pennsylvania if they're going to be going to school in Virginia. So speaking to them from where they're coming from, one of the admissions directors at AU, American University, was telling me that the focus now will be on transfer students. Yes, we've got the students who are redefining their career by going to grad school. They're the people who are starting from freshman year, but then also those kids who just don't really like it where they are as a sophomore, and profiting from those, or at least giving them a place called home. And building an international presence. There are schools that already do this. NYU, they've got their Shanghai, their Abu Dhabi. Babson's got their partnership in Saudi Arabia. Northwestern's got the Qatar campus, and they just opened up the San Francisco one. But especially building the international presences, that's another way I see the enrollment and marketing continuing.
Sorry, I just want to follow on Maxine's point there, because I think it's fascinating that I think there's an intersection here between adult non-credit enrollment trends and what's happening in the traditional space in terms of supporting that sort of personalization. It's interesting when we talk about adult education enrollment trends, more and more institutions are looking at how can we automate the process? How can we make it as seamless as possible? How can we leverage e-commerce best practices? And what's unique about that is by taking as much off the plate of staff as possible, they have the capacity to deliver that personalization and that personal touch that when an individual actually wants help, when an individual is calling in and needs information, they have the time to provide it because they're not doing all the manual steps, all the manual tasks that they're so often in charge of. it's the high touch, high tech idea, right? If you can integrate as much e-commerce best practice as possible and allow those students who've already made their choice, they've made their mind up in the non-credit space, the application process is a lot less rigorous than it is in the traditional undergrad space.
Yeah.
But, if they can go through a process of purchasing a course or purchasing a registration that falls in line with buying a hammer online from the Home Depot, when they do actually have questions, you have staff who are available to answer them and provide the personal touch and provide the guidance that they need to find the offering that suits them. So I think that, just following on Maxine's point, because it's a great one, if we can provide staff the capacity to have as much time as possible to deliver a personalized experience to learners, you have a best of both worlds scenario where, for the individuals who want to drive their own experience, they can. And for the individuals who need help, they have access to it.
Great. Well, I want to just say, I'll give mine, guys. I will say one of the things, to Maxine, to your point about paper applications, one of the things I said a couple days ago when I had the mic in my hand was that young people can crush it on YouTube and TikTok and can't tell time on an analog clock. Make that the foundation for your marketing efforts. Coming out of the conference and listening to the enrollment and marketing trends, my trend to watch for is how hearing a lot of traditional universities, and there was a question, a show of hands of how many of them have integrated marketing and admissions departments, and there were not many hands that went up. There seemed to be severe silos between marketing and admissions. And if there's administrators out there listening to this, like myself, who are trying to run an organization, I cannot understand how it could be done when your metrics in admissions and your metrics in marketing are not coming together, if there's not good communication, if that department of operations, of university operations, which should be comprised of marketing and enrollment and some others, is not communicating. That's a trend to watch for, as I would say, more universities moving towards an integrated marketing and admissions department to try to prevent the enrollment drop-off that they know may be coming. So as we close, I just want to say to the audience, thank you for listening. Of course, I hope you will download this later, and I can guarantee you that the four of us, the marketing and enrollment people, will be sharing it on our LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook and Instagram accounts. I'd also ask the audience, of course, you can follow all four of us on our social media accounts and ask you to do so. And again, I'd like to thank M. Stoner and Higher Ed Live for this opportunity, and thank you, Maxine, Amrit, and Alvin for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Talk to y'all soon.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.